Good morning, grade 9s. Welcome to today's lesson. Today we will be covering useful advice for answering the literature paper on these different genres: short stories, novel, folk tales, drama, poetry. This is your task 8 for task 8.2 during the June exams. Okay, let's start. Make sure you understand and know all the notes on the different literature genres found in the study guide. Remember, you are preparing yourself for an exam. You must understand all those notes and at least know them. Also, make sure you can answer all the questions in the different activities on literature. Very helpful, all those questions. And the answers, of course. Okay, let's start with short stories. When you are preparing yourself now for the exams, make sure that the short story that's in your study guide, that you look at the title, that you can at least understand the meaning of the title, the significance. How is this title related to the rest of the story? Find those answers for yourself. That is how you prepare yourself for an exam. Know at least the name of the author. What is the story about? You must know what the story is about. Remember, this is not a summary of the complete story. This is just, in short, what is this story about? Like, for example, if we look at Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood is about a girl who comes across a cunning wolf on the way to her grandmother's house. So that is what the story is about. And the plot of a story. The plot is about the main events, the action, as it happens, one event after the other. So let's look at this, for instance. Little Red Riding Hood is sent to visit her grandmother. Along the way, she meets a wolf. The wolf, having bad intentions, then decides to arrive at the grandmother's at the grandmother before Little Red Riding Hood, and then, and you will use words like later. So it's one event after the other. That is what the plot is, but it's just the main events. And theme. You must know the theme of the story. The theme is about the ideas that's in that story, the message that's there. So, as an example, once again, in Little Red Riding Hood, the theme can be obey your parents. But there can usually be more than one theme. There can be sub-themes, supporting ideas. Don't trust strangers. That's related to obey your parents. Why did the parents tell her not to walk through the woods? And she talked to the wolf. So don't trust strangers. She told him everything. She told him where she was going, things like that. So that's a sub-theme. People, try with these things that I'm saying now, try to find that in your prescribed stories, the stories there in your study guide and all the things there. Try to apply these things there. See if you can find the answers for your story. There's usually a narrator that we get in a story. Someone is telling the story. That's the person who tells the story. So look at which pronouns are being used. Is it I? Then it's the first person. You, he, she. Just think for a minute about that also, about the narrator. Look at characters and their qualities, their characteristics. So usually we have a main character, which we also call the protagonist. And then we can have secondary characters, supporting characters, which we can call the antagonist. And usually we find conflict between the characters because the antagonist is usually opposing the main character. Okay, so go and look at all those elements and see if you can apply them to your short story. Folklore. Once again, folklore is just another story. So look at all the elements of the short story and see how all the things that we've just discussed, how you can apply them to this the folk tale in your study guide. So usually a folk tale is a traditional story passed on from generation to generation. So you should also know there what is the theme, the message. There's usually a lesson there. And also the story is usually based on superstition. They believe some things. They believe if the wind blows in that direction, it means this is now going to happen, which is not necessarily so, but that's their beliefs, and that's why it's called folk tales. Okay, we've said that you must know the theme, the message. There's usually a lesson to be learned in a folk tale. They want to teach us something. Um, In a folk tale, the secondary character, the antagonist, is usually a villain, a bad person, opposing the main character. But remember, it's not like in the short stories. In the short story, it's not the secondary character, the antagonist, not necessarily a bad person. But here, it's usually a bad person. There's mostly a fight between good and evil. So see if you can find that in your story. Okay, then we get to the novel. You have an extract of 20 fragments of A Ravenous Youth by this person, which I really don't know how to pronounce, on page 49 in the study guide. So that's the author. Pay attention once again to all the notes that you find concerning this novel in your study guide. Think again of all the elements of a short story and try to apply them. Remember, novel is just a story. And then if you look at the drama, a play, you have one there on page 82 to 84 in the study guide. Look at all the questions in the activity on Anansi and the hare. Also focus on things like stage directions. Those are the things that's usually in brackets in italics. It's not you won't find it in the dialogue between the two characters. You find it in those things written in italics in brackets. Like, for example, we find something like scratches his chin. So you don't find that in the dialogue, but you find that, and that gives you an idea. It paints the picture in your mind about what is happening. Think about the set and props. So that information you also find in the stage direction. So let's look at examples. If we say inside Hare's house, that's part of the set. That's the setting. That's where the story is happening now. So that's not part of the conversation. That's in brackets. And then they talk about the food on the table there. So the food that's on the table, that if you see this performed on a stage, the food will then be props, food and plates will be props. But the table there will be part of the setting. So the setting is actually then inside Hare's house, but the table is part of the setting there. There must be a table, there must be a door, and that you find in the stage directions, those things written in brackets in italics. But people, if you want to understand the whole setup, the whole story, look at all those things and prepare yourself. Be prepared. You can't just figure it out once you sit in the exam room. You must know these things. Know the name of the poet. The lines, look at the lines. Are they all the same length? Same number of lines per stanza? Or do they differ? Or some lines may be shorter? Look at the stanzas. How many lines per stanzas? Do they look all the same or whatever? Rhyme. Now usually rhyme, we find rhyme in the end words of each line. But we also get something like internal rhyme, like alliteration, assonance. Prepare yourself. Make sure you know the difference. Make sure you find them in the poem you are studying. Then you are ready for any question can ask you. You should know what the poem is about. The theme of the poem. What's the ideas in this poem, the theme? And the mood, the tone of this poem. Is it sad? Is it joyful? Um, Prepare yourself. Make sure, and I'm sure you will find these in your notes, in the questions, in the activities. You will find answers to these, but be ready to answer anything like this. Figures of speech. Make sure you know all the figures of speech. You understand them. Remember, figures of speech, we find them in all kinds of literature, not only in poems. Okay, so when we get to the exam paper, take note of the following. Look at previous exam papers and the type of questions you might expect. Focus on all the parts of the question you get in the exam paper. Really, people divide it up into parts, unpack that question, make sure what exactly is being asked. Are they asking for more than one thing here? Make very sure of that and understand each little part of the question. Pay attention to the mark allocation. That's always very important. If you get a question like, what do you think? Then you're going to make a statement about what you think. But that's not good enough. You have to justify it. You have to motivate it. Look at this example. If I say, I think Little Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson, that's what I think. That's my statement. But why do I think that? Because in future, she will think twice about not obeying her parents. I've made my statement and I've justified it, gave a motivation. If you get a question to compare, remember if we compare one thing to another, then we must first find similarities and then differences. So for similarities, you can answer something like, both characters have black hair. But when you get to the differences, the contrasts, what is the difference between this and this? Sometimes you only get a question like this. You don't have to compare everything, so you don't have to give similarities as well as contrasts. But should you be asked about contrasts, this, remember, you must indicate the difference between this side and that side. You must refer to both sides, to both people, to both situations, whatever. As an example, in the beginning, Peter was very happy, and at the end, he was depressed. So I had to compare how Peter felt in the beginning and how he felt at the end. So can you see that will be 2 marks? But if you just say eventually Peter was depressed, you did not compare fully, so you won't get your mark. Please keep that in mind. If you get a question about how to discuss something, then you must use complete sentences to explain properly and look at also at the mark allocation. So say for instance, this example, discuss 2 ways Susan shows that she is happy. So if you are going to say laughs and dances, that's not discuss, that's just mentioning it. You must use, really, when you are being asked to explain or to discuss, use complete full sentences. Susan laughs non-stop when she hears the news and dances around the room. Then you might get 2 marks for that. Keep that in mind, people, when answering the paper. Don't rush through the paper. Don't waste time, but don't rush. If you are asked to discuss figures of speech, sometimes you're asked to identify it, and sometimes you are asked to discuss or explain it. If you just have to identify it, yes, that will usually be 1 mark, and you will say metaphor, simile, personification, whatever. But if you have to explain or discuss the figure of speech, say for instance your question is something like, discuss the metaphor in line, and they give you line 20 or whatever, and this is what you find in line 20. Her eyes were diamonds. Right. It's a good thing if you can start by saying what is compared to what is described as what. Her eyes are being described as diamonds, or you can say being compared to diamonds. And then you explain it because they are bright and shiny. That is how you really discuss, explain a figure of speech. Start by the comparison. This is described as this is compared to this, because. Okay, then you will absolutely get all the marks. If you get a question like, do you agree? Do you think it is? Remember to start with the first part of the question. You must start with I agree, I disagree, yes, no, because you won't get a mark for that. You After that you give the reason, the motivation, that's where you get your marks. But if you do not start with this uh, part, the reason, motivation, it won't be marked. You must, that's the first part of the question. You must start with that. Prove your answer with evidence. If you get a question like that, find evidence in the text. That's where you will find your evidence. If you have to quote, you quote words from the text. Okay. Once again, please look at previous text and exam papers. It's a good thing to prepare yourself by looking at those type of questions. Good luck with the exams, people. Make the best studying. And here's a little challenge. When you have time, you can maybe look at this. In general, a person who writes literature is called a writer or an author. What is the exact name for the following? The writer of a novel, the writer of a play of drama, writer of poem, writer of a newspaper article, writer of biography. If you have time, go and find answers to these. It's a good way to expand your vocabulary. Good luck with the literature paper. Thank you for joining.